Okay, so I wanted to take you through just what this sonic experiment entails today. So it's primarily trying to do a first use here of the KOMA electronic Field Kit FX. And if you know about the first field kit, it really allowed for some electroacoustic experiments. And in that particular version, we had everything from the sensor to the DC driver, which allows you to experiment with motors and solenoids. Also has the CV radio and a bunch of other useful functions, including the envelope follower, which I think is a very useful module to have in the semi-modular and also in the modular world. So the Field Kit FX essentially is, as the name says, focused more on the effects side of things. So we have a looper, a frequency shifter, delay, reverb tank, which we have going on here. And if you ordered this with the expansion kit, it came with the reverb tank, some additional contact microphones, some piezos, and also a few cables and miscellaneous things like that. The other thing that is pretty cool about the Field Kit is that it allows you really to interface with your semi-modular and modular gear. So we'll take advantage of some of that today in this experiment, in particular using the Rolodex, which is a CV generator sequencer, which can also be flipped with this switch here to an envelope. And that's what's pretty cool about the Field Kit is it allows you, for example, the looper it allows you to flip it from the looping function into the frequency shifter. And so essentially what I've done is to try to create an instruction sheet here that is describing basically all the routing of the signals. And I'm essentially using the two mixers here on both of the field kits as a summing mixer, and I'm just taking the out of that and recording that directly. So in this particular experiment, I'm not doing a lot of mixing, and there are a lot of imperfections in it, and that's why it's an experiment. So what's happening here is, so I have this instrument I've created, and essentially I guess I could describe this as a structure that allows me to hook up two devices here. It allows me to hook up DC motors, and I have one here which is hitting this snare spring, and I also have one here which on the DC motors I ordered a few plastic propellers, and so I have this one cut a bit, and then it's hitting this wooden skewer to make a sound. I've also then used some of the piezos to try to mic things, and I won't describe all this, but basically we have some of the sound sources are going into the frequency shifter, and then also into the digital delay, and then the reverb tank. And for me, on the initial go around here, the reverb tank, I don't know if I've perfected this, and I wasn't exactly entirely sure if I was hearing, at least when I was recording this experiment, the reverb tank, but I definitely used the delay, which was very interesting, and also the frequency shifter, which I'm really enjoying, and you'll hear some of that on the mix. But to go back to this, so I have two DC motors here, and then I have 4 solenoids. There's one here which is hitting this spring, and you'll see some of it happening during the video. I have another one which is hitting, this is kind of a kalimba setup I have on some homemade instruments, and basically I just have a hairpin and it's hitting against there for the metallic sound. That's the second solenoid. The third one is hitting this pot. It's a ceramic typical pot which has a nice ring to it, and you'll actually see in the video, and you see the aftermath, what happened was when I clamped it, just the pressure of the solenoid hitting, it kept falling off, and that's one of the things I struggle with when I create these sorts of setups where I'm trying to essentially hold, the motors are pretty good, but with the solenoids, just with that back and forth motion, the pushing and the pulling, it's very hard for it to stay stable. And the same thing happened with the 4th solenoid, and this one I have here, and I actually just clamped it to the cable, but this one's hitting the the reverb tank, and so I wanted that as a sound effect, and then also to get the bouncing of the spring on the mix. And again, I'm not sure if that happened. And I just added then some of the KOMA piezo's here and here throughout the instrument. I actually put in a quarter output, and when I in series ran 2 piezos under this box when I created it, but I was getting a lot of buzz, so I'm going to have to go back and look at that. So I ended up using all the externals on this. Now let me then show you what is driving the DC motors. So I just recently got into the world of modular. So I'm using the Bastel 3 of, in this particular video just 2, but I have 3 of these, so I'm not using today the servo. I do have some servo motors, and I'm waiting on some extension cords, but I'm using the DC motor. And as you can see in the module, there's the where you plug in the 2 motors, and these are pretty handy, and these actually come with the Bastel modules, and these allow you just to screw in your 2 wires, and then those go right out to the motors or the solenoid, so those are pretty handy. So the particular module allows us to do some fairly sophisticated things. I'm not doing too much here, but what I did was use a splitter, and then I actually took 2 rhythm tracks that are being doubled on the solenoid tracks and ran those in here. And I don't know if that's going to be that noticeable on this particular mix. The first time through, again, I was just experimenting. So the solenoid allows for 4 solenoids to be hooked up, and you can control the, I guess just the amplitude, and then there are 4 trigger ends, and so these are going to be our rhythm sources. The rhythm is coming from the Kilpatrick Audio Carbon, and this particular sequencer allows up to 6 tracks, and it has very extensive CV and gate outs, and then also MIDI outs, and so that essentially will give us the rhythm tracks. And what's happening then is I'm choosing different patterns just as an experiment, and each track has, I guess it erased my patterns I had in here, but basically each of the 4 tracks that I'm using with the solenoids will have a different rhythm, and then that creates a rhythmic effect, and we can presumably hear that on the mix down. And then what I'm essentially doing is I'm bringing in the motors and the solenoids at different times so you can hear that, and then I'm doing a lot essentially with the effects bus. So I'm doing the digital delay, and then also the frequency shifter. Again, we'll see if the reverb tank, if anything happened there. The other thing I'm doing, and this is really cool with the Field Kit FX, is that you can take basically the CV interface. So you can put any CV signal into these 4 mixer buses, and then essentially, I don't have it plugged in right now, but essentially you choose the color, like let's say purple, and then I choose one of the parameters down here, everything from the VCA level to the feedback and the or the cutoff on the reverb tank, the feedback and time on the delay, and then some of the other features on either the looper or the frequency shifter. And then you essentially set that particular light here. If this is purple, I set this to purple, and then with that CV information going in, that will basically modulate whatever parameter I've chosen. So it's a really cool way, I think, to do a lot in terms of just changing your sound and changing up your mix and so forth. And so what we'll do in the mix is use the Rolodex, and I think maybe I adjust the speed of it, and then that will modulate, I believe, the time on the delay, I think is what I have that doing. Yeah, so this was a first go around. The other thing I should say about it is I have, using the Bastel Grandpa, you'll hear a drone. I have a drone playing off of this module, and this module uses a micro SD card and basically allows you to do granular sampling, modification, and it plays, you know, these low quality samples at I think 22.5 kilohertz, which allows you to do some, I think, interesting sonic things. So you'll hear that playing on one track, and then the second track is entirely composed of the sounds coming from the 2 DC motors and the 4 solenoids hitting various things on this homemade device, including the spring reverb. So here's the first go around for you to check out here on this experiment. I have to say, the next time I do this, I think I'm going to dial it back and start with a really simple experiment to really focus on learning more about the Field Kit FX, because it does have a lot of powerful potentials in terms of doing some sonic and CV experiments.